Hello, everybody. Winging It is a show by Oddbird about web design, development, and our approach to solving problems. On today's show, we will go on a typographic journey to a land of beautifully scaled responsive type. I'm your co-host, Stacey Cavermo, and I'm joined by James Stuckey Weber and, of course, Miriam Suzanne, who has bravely volunteered to walk us through her research in creating perhaps the easier path to responsive typography. Let's see. Thank you
I don't
both
know.
for
I don't
joining
want
me
to
today.
oversell it.
No? Is that too much?
We'll find out. We'll find out.
All right. Well, let's jump right into it. Miriam, you've done so much research, and we've spoken about this on this very podcast several times. And you dove in even deeper. Let's see what you've been working on.
Yeah, I ended up with a lot of charts and graphs to try to understand exactly how various approaches to fluid typography work, and sort of find how I want to do it moving forward, right? So um, it's not necessarily going to be the solution that works for everybody, but I was looking for solving several problems. One is, how do we interact with the user's base font size um, in a way that feels like both it's providing some information about our site. Like if I'm building a spreadsheet, I might want smaller text than if I'm building a blog, right? Different uses are going to call for different sizes of text. So it makes sense that we provide some information about that for our site. But then how does that interact with what the user wants as their default font size? And browsers don't provide a way for a user to say, well, in these cases, I want this default, and in these cases, I want that default. Browsers don't have that sort of fine tuning of default font sizes. The next question is just, how do we create a scale of font sizes from there? How do we get headings that are relative to our base font size? And then how do we make it all responsive? I guess those two could come in any order. How do we make it responsive to the viewport? Should we even make it responsive to the viewport? Can we do it simply? Can we state the math in CSS? This is one of the things that I was trying to figure out. Is, can I say what I mean without doing any like pre-conversion? So if I'm thinking about a pixel size that I want for my font, can I write down a pixel value and CSS takes it from there? And if I'm thinking about a relative size, either relative to the user or relative to something else, can I use a relative unit? And I want to never have to think, well, I want 24 pixels, but the base is, I guess, probably 16. So 24 divided by 16 gives me a
My everyday
multiplier.
math.
And then, like, I don't want to do that. I
Yeah.
just want to, if I want 24 pixels, I want to write 24 pixels. But I want to do that without having some complex calc coming from it. I want to just put it in a simple piece of code and get something from that. So that was one of my starting goals. I want to just say what I mean, and I want to be able to understand the calculation that I'm looking at. Like if I'm doing the calculation in CSS, I want to look at it and have it just be fairly clear what's going on with the values that I've put in. So that's my goal here. And I've sort of, over time and after looking at lots of charts, come to an approach that I'm using and that I feel good about. But I don't know. I feel like different designers on different teams or different design engineers are probably getting different sorts of mock-ups that they're supposed to interpret in different sorts of ways, and that might affect how you go about it. So I can't promise that it will work for everybody. But starting with the question of how do we interact with a user font size, I mean, this came up for me, and I should share my screen here. Share screen. Let's share a whole window.
Sounds like we're chasing a magical unicorn when you described, what to expect. I'm super excited to hear you walk through this.
It is a bit. Okay. So here's the Oddbird website, right? Um, and I'm just going to inspect this text. Well, that's special large text. Let's go down to just our normal body text and look at the font size. So here it's responding to the viewport size. We've clearly got some responsiveness in there. At this point, it's like 26 pixels, which great. I like it. I like on my big screen, I like good big text. And we're sort of using a pretty standard approach to setting font size, which is a little bit larger than the user size plus a little bit of responsiveness. A lot of people will have a more complex calc in there or a clamp or something. We did it at this point pretty simply, but it's starting from a little bit bigger than the user's font and adding a little bit of viewport size. Great. We can see it's already 26 pixels. I like that. I like big old fonts. But I was going in and I was thinking, you know what? I like big old fonts so much that I would like to just set 20 pixels, maybe even 24 pixels as my default because I like it. So why wouldn't I set it as my default? That just makes sense to me. But then I go back to our site and now everything is like it was already 26 pixels. I said that I like 24 pixels. And here, now suddenly Oddbird's site has jumped to 35 pixels. I didn't ask for that. That's not what I asked for. So I didn't like this. And I felt like, wait, I've been building sites that make me not want to set the default font size that I want. And that seems wrong to me, right? Like, I don't want to make websites that make me not want to set my favorite default.
And wait, back up. How did you do that? What is that something that anyone can do in any browser or what?
Yeah, I'm
how
using
did you do
Vivaldi
that?
here, and
Can you
strangely,
Command plus a bunch of
Vivaldi.
times on the
No,
setting?
Vivaldi doesn't let you
No.
zoom the settings, and it doesn't change the settings based on your default font size either. And
Wow.
I'm definitely going to go file a bug after this.
Yeah, that's funny.
Because I don't understand why I can't zoom in on Vivaldi settings. But I just changed the default font size, which you can do in any browser. Some of them do it slightly differently. Like I think Chrome lets you choose medium or large or larger or something. And there's a place where you can go into a nested menu and find actual font sizes, but they're like, you're probably not a developer. You probably don't care about a pixel size. You just want it bigger or smaller. I think that's kind of reasonable, but still, I should be able to choose something larger and not have this font double or whatever from where it was
Sounds like we
before.
need to open some issues in what you're about to change here for us.
Oh
On the
yeah,
Odd site.
open some issues on Odd site and every other site that I've built. I'm not
Well, yeah.
calling out Oddbird here, but I think this is a pretty standard approach. And the other thing is this also breaks my rule for how we get there, because what we were thinking was we wanted 16 pixels, but 1.25 times that, which is, what is that, 24 pixels or something. We wanted 24 pixels, so we wrote 1.25 M. So we did that conversion. So that already broke my first rule, and then it doesn't quite respond in the way I want. So my first step here, let's just get live demo. So say we're starting to build a scale and we want our medium, our normal font size. It's set as the font size. By default, the default font size is medium, so I just set that to start with. Oh, let's zoom in on this. Am I in? Yeah, let's just
Thank you.
do that. Should I go even farther?
It's getting better. I can read it from here, and I have a slightly smaller screen window.
If I go to presentation mode, how's that?
Much
Can
more.
even maybe zoom out a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, because presentation mode lets you change the font size in the... Anyway, there we are. Great. So I've got this set to medium. If I set it to 1M, I get the same thing, because 1M is just going to be the user's default, and medium is also the user's default. And the other values here are the typographic scale that's built into the browser. Did you know that the browser comes with a typographic scale? CSS has a typographic scale built in. It might not be the scale you want, but it's there, and you can just use it using those keywords. But anyway, so we were doing 1.25 Ms, which has this problem that we talked about. And instead, I was thinking, well, what I really want is I want to say, actually, I'm going to do this with a clamp. I want to say just the value that I want, which is, I don't know, 24 pixels. And then I want to clamp that to what the user wants. So the user wants 1M, probably as a minimum. So we could actually just go there. We could say we want the larger of what the user asked for and what I asked for. And this, if I go back to my settings, oh, we've already got it set to 24. But if I set it to 16, we're there. If I set it to 24, it stays the same because we're just getting the larger of the two. But I thought it might be nice for the user to say, well, we also don't want to get too far away from their default. So we could say just like 1.25 times their default is the largest we want to get. Then if they were to change this to, I don't know, 12 in this case, we can see that the text does scale down so that they requested something smaller, and this does clamp it within a range. And I'm not thinking about like whether 1.25 is the same as 24. That sort of doesn't matter. All I'm thinking about is how far am I letting it get from what the user asked for? And I can adjust that scale just thinking the M's are just about the user's font size, not trying to imagine what it's going to be, just saying, what do I want in relation to the user? And the pixels are just about what I want in relation to my screen. Does that make sense?
Yes. I like the way of thinking of that is you think of the clamp function, you have your minimum on the left, and then you have your sort of like your desired in the middle, right? And then you have your max on the right. But if you think about it, instead of like, what values do I need to use here, which is always like the tricky part of like, I've spent many hours like just adjusting like a tenth of a decimal point there and to get the right size as it like scales up and down. But if you just think user size left, user larger, like just a bump up, what would they tolerate here? And then I like thinking of it that way. That's really nice.
Me too. That's what I like about this, is I'm not doing any math. I'm just saying what I want in terms of a relationship.
What will you say when all the questions start rolling in about using pixels?
Well, so the problem with using pixels on their own is that if I just set 24 pixels, And maybe I need to, well, here's one of the reasons I like using Vivaldi. Let's just drag the settings in there. And we want down here this setting. So if I just set 24 pixels, it doesn't respond at all to the user's default font size. But if I set that clamp, now I still have my value set in pixels, but because it's clamped to the user value, they do still get some control if they go outside of the range that I've set. If their default is not within that range of 24 pixels, they get control again. So we're sort of saying, like, as long as we're close to each other, good enough, go with it. But if we start to get far away from each other, trust the user instead of me, which is what I think is how I want to relate to the user. Like if we have a similar idea, let's just go with it. We'll go with what I set. But if we start to diverge, trust them. They know better.
And this feels like a perfect way to, like, if you do get that mock-up and there are specific sizes on all of these headings and subheads and whatnot, this is just really easy to translate that. You put the size in which they defined the thing, and then you say, scale it based on the user preference, a little up, a little down. Is that what you would do?
Yeah. Say that again.
So you're given a mock-up. What do you do?
Oh, yeah.
Would you put the number that you see in Figma right there in the middle?
Yep. And probably, I think I wouldn't ever change these. I would just do always clamp 1M to 1.25M or 1.5M, so like something where, like, yeah, we're giving a little range. I'm allowed to go a little bit bigger than the user, but not too far away from them. So, maybe I would change this value if I want a little bit more range there. But basically, I'm just keeping the clamp function and plugging in the number that I got from the designer.
And that would be for the base text size.
For the base text size. Yeah. So I'm setting that here on medium, and then I'm using that as the base size. So then we can do one of two things. We can create a typographic scale from that, or we can make that responsive. Which one do you want to play with first? Or either way.
Do you have a preference? I was going to say let's go scale, because that's...
Yeah, let's do that.
Looks like what's next here.
Yeah, and this is where I started playing with a lot of charts and graphs to try to understand the problem with scaling to the viewport. And so I want to talk about that for a little bit. So one of the things, let's look at zoom in the browser window. I have this sort of fake browser window that I can resize. And I've got a container query acting like a media query. They work the same way. They're just looking at different things. I guess I don't think the code actually matters much here. So we can just look at this font size inside of this nested viewport is based entirely on container query units, which are like viewport units. But what I wanted to show here is if we've got the viewport set to 600 pixels wide at 100%, if we change the size of the viewport down to 300, we've got a media query, container query that triggers, gives us that background, right? We're getting down to 300 pixels. We get to the same place if we increase the zoom to 200%. Again, the browser sees 300 pixels because, yeah, it was 600 pixels, but they're zoomed pixels, so the pixels are larger. So here we end up hitting that media query again. This is how media queries work. This is how container queries work. this is just how Zoom works. And this
And
is
that's-
how container and viewport units work.
And that's the Zoom CSS property. Is that what you're changing there?
Yeah, which is the same. I'm using the Zoom CSS property, but that works the same as zooming in or zooming out. Except that because that viewport is nested, it sees something a little different there. But we can show that. Here's one that's simple. So we've got this background that changes from pink to teal at 800 pixels, and we can get there by resizing the browser window, or we can get there by zooming in. Either way, we get there. Viewport units work the same way. So we don't know when we're looking at the size of the viewport, we don't know if we're looking at a small viewport or a large viewport zoomed in. Those are the same thing as far as we're concerned. And what's interesting about that, I don't think that means we don't want to respond to the viewport. Well, we've been doing responsive web design for a reason. It's a good idea. We should keep doing responsive web design. But we should keep in mind that we don't know if we're looking at a small viewport or a large one zoomed in. And those are very different for the user. They're trying to achieve different things zooming in than they're trying to achieve making the viewport smaller. So sometimes we might want to give them the same adjustments, but we don't know which thing they're trying to do. So we can't totally rely on it. I have that one open twice. So here's what happens if we start to use viewport units. And maybe I can zoom this in a bit. But this is a graph of calc B plus V, which is a base size and viewport units. And if we take out the base size, I also have a zoom here we can play with, but if we base our font size just on viewport units, I have a line showing our font size at different viewport sizes. So as the viewport gets bigger, our font size gets bigger. And then I have a what is 2 times our font size. So I've got a line showing that, and it goes up at twice the rate, right? Why 2 times? Because that's the web accessibility guidelines. Users should be able to zoom any font to at least 2x. So we want to know where that line is. And if we're using just viewport units, it doesn't matter how much I change the zoom, nothing happens. Here, if we add a base font size, we can see that zoom applying. If I remove the viewport units, we can see it works. So when we get to 200 times zoom, we get to 2 times our font size. It's just sort of linear. Works great. As soon as we start adding viewport units, the zoom is less effective and doesn't get us to that 2x font size all the time. And if we're only using viewport units, we can't zoom at all. That's what this demo shows too. We can resize the viewport and our font size changes with the viewport. But if we change the page zoom, nothing changes. Because viewport units the viewport gets smaller at the same rate that the viewport units grow, right? Zooming in does the same thing as making the screen smaller, so nothing changes. I don't know if I've made sense there. Are we following?
Yes, we're following.
Great. So we've got this problem. And there's some point at which, so if we provide a base size and we can only zoom that base size, then zoom increases at one rate, but 2 times our font size increases at a different rate. And there's some point at which they cross where even at maximum zoom of 500, we can only get to 200% zoom of the font. And that's the cutoff point where we're no longer providing accessible zoom. So this is the thing that we have to think about. The more we respond to the viewport, the more viewport units we add, the less we are responsive to the user's zoom. And there are people who argue, like, with large fonts, this doesn't matter because the font's large already. Do we really need to? Well, yes, according to the guidelines, we do need to provide 200% zoom. And we can argue about whether those are good guidelines. They are the guidelines, though. So if you're trying to make a site that passes accessibility checks, you need to do it. And I think there's also an argument that it's good for users to be able to have some control. And what we're doing is saying, even if the text size is large, if you have some reason you want to zoom in on it, we won't let you. If we're taking that control away. So there's some point here where 200% zoom no longer gives you twice the font size. It turns out that point is always sort of at the same relationship to the font size. And that's because we can only do 500% zoom and we're only zooming the base size of the font. So wherever we started it. So this is like calc 16 pixels plus 2.8 VI is what we're looking at right now. The more viewport units we use, the tighter that gets. But we can also look at this in terms of how effective is zoom. So this is sort of a different graph, just overlaid. We're still looking at a horizontal axis of the viewport size, but now we're looking at how effective is 500%, 400%, 300%, and 200% zoom. And when we don't have any viewport units, they're fully effective. As soon as we start adding viewport units, each of those becomes less effective the bigger our viewport is. So they're sort of curving down and becoming less effective to the point where 500% zoom is getting us a 200% effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. Looking at that made me really wonder how much we want to decrease the efficacy of users using their zoom. When those curves start to get real narrow, real tight, I start to get worried. And I just thought that was a useful visualization to keep in my mind. Like, I'm saying that when you zoom 500% at a viewport that's a fairly common viewport size, I'm going to barely zoom in even though you asked for 500%. So I think this is a similar problem where we haven't been thinking enough about how we're impacting users.
Is there anything to even test for something like that? I mean, that never would be flagged in any sort of automated usability testing, right? And if that's the guideline, I don't think I've ever checked to see if this could go up to 200% or more.
Yeah. I mean, you can definitely just test it on your own by checking a font size and then zooming in. So it's 24. Am I at 0? I am. So if I zoom into the maximum zoom of 500, oh, is it going to keep telling me that my font size is?
It should adjust. Other browsers adjust, I know.
Oh, no, it's just that it's 24 pixels. Whoa, I don't have this being responsive right now. So we're just getting that base. But we could say, yeah, 24 times. Yeah, I guess that is a little bit hard to test. You would have to look at a chart or do the math. I know that tools like Utopia, FYI, they added a thing. There's other places you can go that will do that check for you. But yeah, or you can come to, where's my demo? You can come to my demo. I think we have this linked from an OddSite post. OddSite, oddbird.net, oddbird.dev, one of those article links to this so you can play with it. So one of the things you can do is add clamping to a value. And I don't know here what I have to. It's not showing my clamp. Maybe I messed something up in there. But we can add clamping to avoid ever getting to that point, right? Like there's a safe zone in here, and if we clamp our viewport units to within the safe zone, we're okay. The other approach to, so that's like using viewport units. Sorry, I'm clicking around a lot. Okay, so if we use viewport units, 0.2 VI, viewport inline size, then we're getting sort of a responsive. The point at which it becomes a problem is always the point at which our resulting font size is 2.5 times, or at least if we keep it from growing 2.5 times based on the viewport, we won't hit that problem. So that's the thing to avoid, both with viewport units and also if we were using a media query. So we could do at media min width, I don't know, 800 pixels, and change the font size to 32 pixels. This has exactly the same problem that using viewport units has. They both have the same problem because both of them are based on that. Is it zoomed or is it small? Both have that same measurement issue. So whether we're doing it in a fluid way with viewport units or whether we're doing it in a responsive way with breakpoints, either one has this problem where if the larger size is more than 2.5 times the small size, we've got a problem. So either solution to scaling, we have to be careful not to scale something more than 2.5x. So that's just a thing we can keep in mind to make sure that we don't go too far. Yeah, also making sure, so if we're using viewport units, we can try to like clamp within that range, as long as the smaller value in the clamp is not, and the larger value aren't more than 2.5 times apart, we're probably safe. So then we have two options for getting larger here. One is this, the media breakpoint. And I sort of like that if you're thinking in terms of like, oh, we're at a larger font size or we're at a larger screen size and we should make the font larger, we could do a thing here like preferred, which I can't spell. Are there two R's?
I think so.
Great. So we could do a thing like we'll have our preferred and we'll use it in there. And then that's what we'll change here to preferred 32. So at some breakpoint, we switch to a different preference. Where is 800 pixels? Did I? Are we seeing a switch?
Can you make them, well, add a color, then we'll know.
The old background red test. Oh, that's where we get the jump. Yeah, now we can see it now that they're farther apart. So I think this is the easiest way to go responsive, right? If you just are like, well, I don't know, at some larger screen, and we could do it based on M's to whatever. At some larger screen, I want to go to some larger font size. I recommend this as just the simplest way to get some responsiveness and be able to see, like, is 32 more than 2.5 times 16? It's not. Okay, we're fine. We're there. We're done. We've got our responsive typography. Now, some people would rather think in terms of, I know where it starts. I know how far I want it to go. I want it to just fluidly adjust. It's the same consideration. We don't want to let it get too far. But the nice thing about this approach, I'm going to go back to just saying 24 pixels in there, is if we want to add viewport units, we can just do it. And we can add container units instead if we want. But now we've got it starting at our 24 pixels. And maybe we say, well, since I'm adding some viewport units, I'm going to take my baseline down a little bit and add to them. But there, it works. And what I like about this approach, we can sort of adjust how fast it moves. That's like, the bigger this number is, the faster we grow. But we're still clamped within a range. The smaller the number of this is, the slower it grows. And so we're sort of changing the range of the viewport over which it's going to scale, but we still have the same range of scaling allowed. And every unit represents itself. Nothing here is a calculation. If we wanted to be like, no, I need it to start growing at 600 pixels and I need it to stop growing at 800 pixels or whatever, we can do a calculation to get there, but I'm not sure why. Except that a designer handed me those two mock-ups and they're the two numbers I know. Like, that might be a reason why. But to me, this is enough. Like, there, I've done it. Did I do it?
I think so. So let's go further.
Okay.
Well, we go with whatever you'd like to continue with.
No, go for it.
What will you do? I wish I had a mock-up to give you. I just want you to go in and add some extra sizes for the extra elements.
Right. So create a type scale.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I copied in a few, like, a common thing to do is to use musical scales or the golden ratio. So I just copied in some of those. And you can copy in the actual values. I copied in the calcs because I think it's fun to see how these are actually calculated. Hopefully I got those calculations right. But those are common scales that are used to get sort of a typographic scale. So let's pick one. What do we want the scale to be? You want to just pick one?
I'm not a music person, so I've always felt left out when we use music.
Do you want to go with the golden ratio?
Yeah, that's fine.
There is nothing magical about the golden ratio, but it is a number you can choose. So here we go. To generate these, we would say, let's not start with extra small. Let's start with the first one up, going up. So we're going to calc our, well, at this point, because our base font size is this medium, it's the result of that medium, we can refer to that as 1 rem. So large is just going to be 1 rem times, wait, how does that work? I've done it, but it's not in my mind. Here is the calculation. and we can use the POW function to get where we want. So it's 1 rem times POW for our scale, and then we're just going 1 step up our scale. And then if we want to go 2 steps up our scale, we take that same calculation. So this just makes it so that at each step, we're not just going 1.618 or whatever times. We're going 1.618 for the first one, and then for the second, we're going 1.618 to the power of 2 to get our extra large. And just at each level of the scale here, we can increase that another one. One thing that I find is if you do this going down, it goes down too fast. So generally going down, people will not use like -1, -2, and so on. But let's just see it. This is following whole steps in the scale. Did I do something wrong there? How come oh, I know what it is. Going back to my web page settings, some Chromium browsers provide this minimum font size setting, which can get in the way of these demos. Maybe that wasn't it. We're still getting that sort of minimum applied there. Not sure what that's coming from. But more common than getting that small that fast would be to say, let's not go whole steps here. Let's go partial steps in our scale. Oh, now it's adapting. So we go down a little bit slower. But we can do the same thing sort of with, we could make these variables and we could change the variable in a heading at H1 or H2 or something. And we're just using the POW function to get our multiplier, and then we're multiplying it times our base size to get the scale.
Finally,
this is a little bit, this is a little bit of a more complex calc, but again, everything in it represents itself. There's nothing in it that's some magical number or calculation that I had to do somewhere else to get the value that I wanted.
And just so I understand, the 1 rem, it's referring to the font size that you're setting on the document root, which is HTML. So if you were setting that on something else, you might not, or the 1 rem wouldn't work. But that's why that font size is getting picked up as that base.
Right.
Okay.
Yep. I think it also can be interesting if you want to think about like leaving 1 rem as a user value. You could set all of this on the body instead, and then 1 rem always refers to the user. And then you would probably change all of these for your scale to be 1m instead, or you would change them to be var medium instead or something. But the interesting thing about doing it on the body is now 1 rem always refers to whatever the user said, which is kind of an interesting thing to leave yourself, a unit that refers to what the user asked for as the baseline, because then you can reference it for other things. So I don't know how important that is, but I think it's an interesting thing to consider. Do we leave 1 rem to the user? I don't know. Yeah. So these all grow sort of in relation to each other, following the same scale as this. And I'm going to make it maybe exaggerated just so that we can see it for the sake of a demo. But it doesn't even feel that exaggerated. Is it because of something I have in the settings? I don't think so. maybe if we look at the actual resulting font sizes here.
This is me all day. Like, is it me, or am I looking at the right thing, or is there an error? Is this how it's supposed to work? Yeah, it's not scaling. Is that because
it's not
all,
scaling?
all at the top of
why
your
isn't it
1.25 times the user?
Oh, is that it?
I don't know.
Could be it. Let's set that to closer to the user setting. Yeah, that's what it was. We were just sort of at the max already. So here we can see, and I like the idea of getting here by putting in numbers and adjusting the numbers and then resizing my screen and zooming in and zooming out. I like the idea of like pixels aren't meaningful. What's meaningful is the result of pixels. So it's not the number 16 that's important to me. It's the result that I get from doing these different interactions with the calculation I've given. Anyway, so this is, all of them are scaling linearly. One of the things that utopia.fyi gives you on top of this is like scaling each one potentially a different amount, or changing the scale over time. And actually changing the scale over time is something that we can do here. We could set it up relative to viewport units, but more simply, we could say at 800 pixels or 30 ems or whatever we want to choose, we could change our scale. So we could start with, let's say, a minor second, a tighter scale at our small fonts or at our small viewport size, and go up to like a major third at some point. And this isn't doing the sort of fluid scaling of your scales that they're doing, which would be a little bit more complicated to write out as a calc. But it does give you at some point here, let's switch to a larger, and maybe I have to choose something more dramatic for the purposes of a demo. Yeah, there we go. So on smaller screens, we're getting a tighter scale, and on larger screens, we're getting a wider scale. And I've overdone it here, but you get the idea. We can change the scale at some point. Because on large screens, it makes sense to have a little more spacing between things. So we can still get there, and we can get there pretty directly, I think.
One of the things with responsive design that always kind of breaks my brain is, as a designer, or as I'm developing this, I'm constantly dragging my viewport, making it bigger and smaller. And with my phone, I can't drag the screen back, open and close. But most people see it at one snapshot, and I like it tickles my brain to see this smoothly going between sizes. But then I remember, people aren't seeing that part, but they are seeing the individual snapshots along that ride, or along that scale. And if each of those are what we want and what the user wants, that's still beneficial, even if they don't get the cool slide.
It's so satisfying, though, to watch it slide up.
It is really satisfying, but yeah, I agree. There's sort of people do change the size of their window, but they usually change it quickly and then stick with it, right, for a while. I think people aren't sitting here going changing back and forth
to size.
I do want to encourage people to consider breakpoints are fine. I don't know. I hear a lot of I don't know, breakpoints are extrinsic and using viewport units is like an intrinsic thing. But then people are like plugging in calculators to basically convert breakpoints to viewport units. And I'm like, I don't get it. What are you doing? You're taking those viewport values anyway. And it just, instead of saying them, you're plugging them into a calculator to generate something that you think is more intrinsic, but it's exactly as extrinsic because it's exactly as based on a number you came up with. So if you have the number in mind, just say the number. Just say, if you know where the breakpoint is, just say the breakpoint. Like you don't have to get complicated with it and do a conversion to get a unit out of a breakpoint. If you know the unit, use the unit. If you know the breakpoint, use the breakpoint. That's fine. They're both fine. That's my take. We don't have to make this more complicated than it is.
But we can. But actually, I want that one.
We always will. Yeah.
I say while giving you calculations with POW functions. Yeah.
In our outline, there's a bonus. Do we want to go over the bonus for the people?
Yeah,
we have 8 minutes until James and I have a meeting.
I'm using it down here. But the question is,
more math.
Like some people have complained, let's say that our body has a margin of 1m. A lot of people use m's for margins and padding, and that seems all right. But then let's say I start to zoom in. That padding is getting larger at the same rate that our screen is getting smaller, which, if I've set this to like 3m's or something, if I've given myself a nice amount of extra space when I'm zoomed out, and then I zoom in and I'm sort of increasing the white space while I'm making the viewport smaller, that doesn't seem quite right. There's something mismatched there, but I do still want a value that's based on my font size because it makes sense to have spacing based on a font size. So I've been playing with various approaches to this. One of them is to just say, okay, let's take the maximum of the font value that I said, and I don't know, 2vi. I don't want the maximum, I want the minimum. I want the smaller of the two. So when I zoom in, 2vi takes over because 3m's has gotten too big for the space. And then I'm saying, yeah, I want it based on the font size unless we're getting tight. And then I want it based on the viewport size. That's one way to do it. The other thing I've been using instead is like, what I really want is it relative to, let's say, actually I want it relative to a line height. So, well, I got this in the wrong order. I want it relative to the line height. I want it to be some fraction of the line height. I want it to always be like 0.5, some multiple of 0.5 of the line height. So I'm going to round up to 0.5 of the line height from 2vi. So give me 2 viewport units rounded up to the nearest half line. And then as the screen grows, I sometimes jump to the next, like now we've got space for a whole line. There we've only got space for a half line. There's space for a whole line. If I kept going up, and that means when I zoom in or out, I get more or less space. It's still based, the amount of space I'm getting is still based on the font size or the line height, but it's also clamped by how much space there is on the screen. So I've been using this, I've been setting this often as like a gap value, a gap custom property, and then I can do like half a gap or multiple gaps. And I just use, and you can adjust how much of the viewport we're okay taking up or something, and it'll switch at a different place depending on what that value is. But responding to multiple things, I think, is pretty fun. So that's the sort of bonus how I now think about spacing properties in relation to all this. Do you want to judge how I did? Did I come up with something that sort of more closely meets my goals without really complicated calculations, or going away to a calculator and bringing a calculation back to convert units or anything like that? How'd I do?
I'm unmuted, so I'll say that you did very Miriam worthy of this. Like, it's very, like, you can read it, it's meaningful, you can see the numbers there, and I think you explained it really well to know like where your head is and what research you did to even like start to dive into this.
Yeah, I
This
think
gap one is really like breaking my brain, because I'm like, ooh, how does that affect the rest of the page if line height may differ? Like, I might have a smaller line height and some. So
yeah,
it'll
well,
be,
so we could use root line height there if we wanted
yeah,
to keep
okay.
it consistent across.
Yep.
And if we really wanted to go the other direction and make it like container based specifically, we could say CQLH, and we get
I think I want R.
relative to the container query line height. And maybe line height isn't always what we want. Maybe sometimes M's make sense. I've started using, the other thing I do here is like, if what I want is new line spacing between paragraphs, then I care about line height. So paragraph margin block, I'll set to some fraction of a line height. But when I'm thinking about horizontal things, I maybe don't care about the line height. I maybe care about some other calculation that's relative to the viewport, right? And like the space between paragraphs, I'm not going to make tighter necessarily on a small screen. I guess I could, but what I'm worried about there is specifically how big is the line. And what I'm worried about with a lot of other padding on cards or something is something a little bit different from the height of a line. So I can use different things to say exactly what I mean.
And I think what the underlying thing there is you're being much more, I don't know, declarative. You're not going away to get some calculation, and you're saying, this is what I want. This is the relationship between the things I want. And that, I think part of why you're doing this now is a lot of these CSS functions are newish. And 5 years ago, 10 years ago, none of this is possible in CSS. So it's
so I'm not saying that we've been sleeping on this for years. I'm saying we can do this now. We can do these like rounding and like we've had clamp for a little bit longer than rounding, but round is fairly new, and the POW function is fairly new. These are things we can do now. We also have a lot more units, and I think of a unit as basically like it's a variable that's been pre-prepared for us with this shorthand where we can get multiples of it, right? I can say calc gap times 2 or something, but with a unit, it's the same idea, but it's like you can just say 2 gap or 2 LH, 2 EM, whatever. So it's sort of a shorthand for a variable calculation. There's a proposal for custom units where we could be like, I want 1 gap. That's not been done. That's not done yet. Nobody has that, but there's a proposal for it, which would be fun.
Coming to you on a Winging It 2029. All right, we have to go. So I'm going to do this real fast. Please visit oddbird.dev/wingingit for all links and show notes from today's episode. Miriam, can you tell us briefly a little bit about the course you're working on?
Yeah, I'm working on a CSS course called Poetic CSS that is really about how CSS works the systems and logic behind it, so that you're not just learning one-off tricks or like what does each property do on its own. You're learning how CSS all fits together. And then, so I think of it as systems, both in terms of like how CSS is designed as a system, and then also how we can build systems around it. So it's really systems thinking around CSS. How do we make it resilient? How do we think about it in these sorts of ways where we're not doing complex things when there's a more straightforward approach where we can just say what we mean. I want us to be able to just say what we mean and get a good result.
Love it.
Coming
Absolutely.
soon.
Miriam's a fantastic teacher. Couldn't recommend it more. Please like and subscribe. If you want to learn more about Oddbird, check out our newsletter, oddbird.dev/oddnews. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for your demos and explaining them, Miriam. And remember, best practice is a conversation. So let's keep talking. See you